Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to Vancouver and we're going to do some settlement of disputes, I think. At least I'm hoping to learn a little bit because I'm going into an area where I'm not too competent. But we're going to talk with Ernest Thiessen, who is a conflict resolution specialist. He is the head of something called Smart Settle, which is a company that offers to help people get over their disputes. Good morning, Ernest Thiessen. How are you?
Well, I'm great, and thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So you help people to solve their conflicts, and you're going to explain it all to me now in a slow enough terms so that I will follow you, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, like I told you earlier, I thrive on questions. So we'll just get started and I'll just follow your lead as you ask me different questions.
I'll tell you, let's start off first easy, because the easy question for me is, what were you doing in Nepal? Let's spend a couple of minutes or at least on that.
Right. Well,
that's really important to know that you actually can apply this stuff in a real situation.
Yeah, well, that's where it all started. We're seconded by Mennonite Central Committee to the United Mission to Nepal. And this was during the 80s, where we spent 2 years with Mennonite Central Committee. And most of that time I was on a very remote rural development project. And the engineer that was there before I was there noticed that there was the river system came very, it was a very windy river system, but at one point farther upstream, it came very close to the place where it would end up, and there was just a relatively small ridge in between, and he figured that if we dug a tunnel through the ridge, that we could both create hydropower and irrigate all of that land. Well, so half the people in that area were living below the subsistence level, so we could bring a lot of benefits to that area. And it was my job as an irrigation engineer to figure out how we were going to deliver water to all of those people who were really badly in need of it. And so there was a conflict. How much water is going to go for irrigation? How much water is going to go for hydropower? And so that would be the negotiation. And that actually later on turned out to be the context, the example that I used in my PhD dissertation that I did later at Cornell University.
Mm-hmm.
So my major advisor at Cornell gave me a challenge. He said, there's a huge gap between engineers and decision makers. And could I bridge that gap? So I had no idea what I was in for, but I said, sure, I'll give it a try. And this was before the internet. So, they had a very nice library there at Cornell, and I discovered what I could. But the one important thing that I missed was the fact that John Nash had already solved the problem.
John Nash being, I happen to remember that name from having seen the film A Beautiful Mind.
That's right.
Mathematician who had schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Amazing.
So, but in spite of his challenges, he was a smart guy. And the thing that he's famous for is the Nash Equilibrium. I'm going to show you an illustration a little bit later when we get to that. And he also came up with another algorithm for getting past that Nash equilibrium. And I'm going to tell you that too in the context of an illustration. But before we get there, let me start off with something simpler.
Mhm.
So I heard you talking about the prisoner's dilemma and the game theory and that, and you've probably read that book, Getting to Yes.
Yes, I used to use it when I was teaching negotiation and nonviolence. That was the course I called it. Mhm.
All right. So Getting to Yes was written by Fisher and Urey.
Mhm.
Fisher and Urey were students of now the late Professor Emeritus Howard Rafa at Harvard University,
Mhm.
who is like world-renowned expert on negotiation analysis. He's one of my mentors next to my major advisor, Professor Pete Laux at Cornell University. Those two eminent professors, basically, I give a lot of credit to for where I've gone. But getting back to that book, Getting to Yes, in that book is a story. So I didn't invent this story. It's the orange quarrel. There were two children quarreling over an orange. And they were about to destroy that orange in their fight, but there was a clever mediator, maybe their mom, came along and said, listen, let's see if we can solve this without destroying the orange. And well, the first idea was, okay, let's just cut it in half, Joey cut and Sally choose. Well, that's a common method of mediation, right? One person cuts and the other person chooses. Well, what would they get in that case? Well, they'd each get 50% of the orange. But when you dig a little deeper and ask these two children why they want the orange and discover what their interests are, if you know the story, you'll remember that Sally wanted to bake a Christmas cake which called for the peels of exactly one orange. She wasn't interested in the fruit. And Joey was just going to throw the peels in the wastebasket. So if you give Sally all the peels and Joey all the fruit, you divided the orange in half and they both get 100% of what they want.
Mhm.
So we call those, those are trade-offs. And in real life, you can never get 100% for both parties, but you can almost always do better than 50-50.
Almost always, really.
Almost
Oh,
always. So,
that's interesting.
except in the most trivial of negotiations, uh, uh, people have this concept of a negotiation as just one-dimensional. If you get more, I have to get less.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That's where they're stuck, in that one-dimensional concept of negotiations.
Uh-huh.
And probably this is the time to switch to my illustration.
Okay, sure. Do a screen share and let's see what you have
Okay.
prepared there.
And so what I'm going to do is tell this story in the context of a project that we're doing for Rotary International. We simulated a negotiation between India and Pakistan, and the World Bank was part of the negotiation as well. So there are some videos, draft videos we've already created, and I'm going to make those available to Meta, and she'll provide you with the links so that you can see all of those, the negotiations. In this workshop, we imagined that there was a place called Cashland. It's an imaginary place like Kashmir. So if you know the real world, India is to the south here and Pakistan was on the left side. And India and Pakistan have been fighting about this area, the real area called Kashmir, for a long, long time. And
Now, excuse me, but I've never really looked at a good map of Kashmir, but I presume that this actually is would look exactly like the map of Kashmir. Is that right? In
yeah,
terms of the borders
it
and
is.
all.
Well, these boundaries should be identical to the real place that we call Kashmir.
Uh-huh.
So if you look up Kashmir, it'll be identical to this. But we're imagining that a lot of the conflict has already been resolved, and they've established these boundaries, the red lines, which are actually the present day lines of control. So India, in practice, is controlling up to those. India and Pakistan are each controlling up to those lines, except for that area, that triangle at the right side called the Siachen Glacier, and they're still fighting over there.
Mm.
So in my imagined negotiation, that's one of the issues. And there are some other areas to the right you can see in green that are disputed as well. And we're imagining that that's been settled and given to China, and that's no longer a problem. So China is not part of our simulated negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we had this workshop with like a dozen people, mostly Rotarians, and they came up with a list of issues that were important to India and Pakistan. And you can see they're listed here, and each issue has a negotiating range. For example, well, the first one about the glacier, what are we going to agree to, status quo, or give it to India, or give it to Pakistan? And the second one is about water storage. We're going to negotiate between 3 and 4 million acre feet, and so on. All this will be explained in the video, the links that Meta will provide to you. And each of these issues is assigned by Pakistan. In this case, we're looking at it from Pakistan's point of view, and the numbers on the right side are how important each one of these issues are. And you can see near the bottom the international contribution to Pakistan. So the World Bank is going to contribute some money to these two countries as part of the negotiation. And Pakistan has said that that's worth 350 points. And so the second most important issue, it looks like, is the net zero emissions target date at the very bottom. How soon are the countries going to come to net zero emissions? But actually, if you add up the first 5 issues there, you'll see that the water issues are actually more important. And then there's another issue there about both eliminating nuclear weapons. Well, they're stuck in this place where they have nuclear weapons, and everybody hopes that nobody will ever use them, but getting rid of them, how are you going to do that? Well,
now wait a minute, how did you get them to assign these points? Did you give them a certain number of total and say, now divide it up among these different issues, or was it open-ended?
Yeah. Well, sometimes we say, well, if we give you 100 points, just distribute that 100 points among all the issues. But in this case, we said, we're not going to restrict you to, a certain number of points. Just start anywhere and be arbitrary, but the points have to be relative to each other. And actually, what Pakistan did in this case is they looked at that issue, the second last international contribution to Pakistan, and they assigned points to that issue, so that 1 point was worth about $10 million. and then everything else is relative to that.
I see. Okay, I see.
Okay. So now I'm plotting the satisfaction.
But immediately what occurs to me is if they say all that we care about is pleasing the World Bank enough to get money, and the rest of it, these other issues, which are the things they're fighting over ostensibly, I imagine, those issues are really very trivial. They would, if they're rational, they'd be glad to sacrifice almost all of those, in fact, all of them, for the sake of just placating the opinions of people in Washington and the World Bank.
Well, if you, in the negotiation, the people representing the World Bank point of view, the things that were important to the World Bank were these countries coming to net zero emissions at an early date and getting rid of their nuclear weapons.
Oh, that makes it easy. Then if I were a Pakistani, I'd just say, okay, you tell me what to do and I'll be glad to do it.
Okay. Well, it's, I guess in real life, it's not quite that simple. And I'm going to try to illustrate that here in this two-dimensional view of the process, where we have India's satisfaction plotted on the vertical axis and Pakistan's satisfaction plotted on the horizontal axis. So I told you that story about the orange coral, and if we would, imagine how that one was plotted here, you have Joey on one side and Sally on the other, and when you gave the peels to one and the fruit to the other, they both ended up with 100%. So if you can see my mouse here, they would have ended up over here at 100%. If you would plot that particular negotiation. But as I mentioned, real negotiations like this one that we're imagining, getting to 100% satisfaction for both parties is not possible. And so let's see. Where we started with these two countries and the people that were representing them is asking them to see if they can describe, like, what's the situation right now. And if we go back to this list of issues, you could look at each one of these and you could say, well, if we went away from this negotiation and didn't change anything, what would the status quo be? And come up with a package that represents that status quo. And on this graph, that status quo, we'll arbitrarily say that we're going to assign that 0 in our negotiation. So we want to get better than 0 in our negotiation. So you can see that the parties want to be somewhere in the top right quadrant. And in every negotiation, there's also a boundary called the efficiency frontier. That is the very maximum that you can get in a particular negotiation. And it is defined by the preferences of the parties. So in that previous example that I explained to you, the efficiency frontier went all the way up to the top right quadrant because it was actually possible to get 100% for each party. But in most negotiations, you can't get that much, but you can almost always get more than 50-50, which in this case would be around there.
Now, how do you know what that efficiency frontier is?
Well, we don't. Nobody knows, when you come into a negotiation what that is. And usually nobody even discovers it. They just know that it's there somewhere. But with Smart Settle, we have an intelligent neutral site that actually puts everything together and figures out where that efficiency frontier is based on the preferences of the parties. So skilled facilitators can help elicit those preferences from each of the parties, and within the Smart Settle Infinity interface, we represent those preferences, and that is communicated to the neutral site. It's all kept confidential, but when all the parties, and there's actually a third party, the World Bank, we're only showing two here, when all the parties communicate those preferences to the neutral site, that neutral site keeps them private and confidential, but then it knows how each party can become satisfied in this negotiation. And of course, it also knows where that efficiency frontier is. And so it knows in which direction it needs to guide them.
I see. Okay. But now to even have an imagination, a notion of where that efficiency frontier is, you must have two more sheets that you haven't shown me yet. You showed me the one of the preferences by the weighted preferences for Pakistan. Presumably you have another graph showing the weighted preferences for India, and then you must have two more. Once each one saying how much. No, the first two are about how important the answer is to them, and the second one must be what they actually want from the deal, right? So you have two sheets showing their preferences numerically somehow. Is that
right?
True?
So if you watch the video, this is all shown to you in the video. We show the whole simulation, and you'll see the Smart Settle Infinity interface and how they can actually put packages together. And you're right. All that information is necessary. I'm just showing you, a small part of it here. Mm-hmm. And the neutral site needs all of that information, puts it all together in order to know how to guide the parties.
Okay, now this, I'm trying to be as ornery as possible and make trouble for you as we go along, but this assumes that you've got some rational actors who know what their preferences are. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that that's always, I'm sure, in fact, that it's not always the case. I think, people act on the basis of some, they don't like the other guy's religion or something in the case of India and Pakistan, and not over whether they're going to get a certain quantity of water from a glacier.
Yeah.
So if they tell you that they're really interested in glaciers and water, mm-hmm. You're assuming that they're telling the truth, or that they even know what's the truth. And I kind of doubt that, frankly.
The beauty of this process is that if you misrepresent your preferences, you won't get what you want. So the parties, of course, need to practice this ahead of time. They're not going into this for the first time. They have practiced it. Maybe they're doing role reversal, and they're doing it each separately. They're practicing against people in their corner and trying to figure out what the other party's preferences are, and as they develop their own preferences. And there's a lot of practice on this before you go into it for real, so they understand that if they try to misrepresent their preferences, it's just counterproductive.
Okay.
So yes, in real negotiations, that's exactly what happens. But if you try to do that with Smart Settle, you will lose.
Okay, except if you lose, I mean, a lot of people would just say, well, keep it. I'm not gonna play. I don't have to accept that outcome, right? There's
Right,
there's
right.
nothing to make them take this
Well,
step
then there,
across. They
then,
would maybe rather stay with the status quo than any
well,
improvement you might give them, because they just plain don't want to deal with the other guy.
sure. Well, that would seem to me a very irrational to want to stay at the status quo when you could be up there at something a lot better.
Yeah, but empirically, does it happen?
Yes, it's
Doesn't it
sure.
happen?
Of course it does. You need parties who understand the process, and they have agreed that they're going to try to do this in good faith and be collaborative. Unless you get to that point, it's really fruitless. So you need parties that really understand what the potential benefits are in this process. So let me relate this back to game theory. And we were talking about John Nash earlier. So John Nash came up with this idea called the Nash Equilibrium. And he said that this is where people get stuck. And in our case, we can imagine that Nash equilibrium is that 0, 0 point. In the case of India and Pakistan, and they're stuck there and they can't get past that 0, 0 point. They're just but Nash also said that if these parties would somehow agree to collaborate with each other, then there's an algorithm that he invented called maximize utility product that would take them from the status quo or the Nash equilibrium up to the efficiency frontier. So there were those two things that got him the Nobel Prize, the concept of the Nash equilibrium and the algorithm that will take you from that Nash equilibrium up to the efficiency frontier. And I mentioned earlier that my major advisor gave me a challenge. And basically the answer to that challenge was an algorithm that goes from the status quo to the efficiency frontier. But I had no idea that John Nash had already solved that problem. And I came up with a different solution. And it was called maximize the minimum gain. That's the name that I gave it in my dissertation. And well, we published that. And then Professor Emeritus Howard Rafa, at Harvard University, he found that publication that we had done, and he said, I'm going to look at that and compare it to what John Nash has done. And actually, there were a couple of other academics that had come up with other methods of getting to the efficiency frontier. And he wrote a paper where he concluded that he preferred the solution that I came up with.
Wow. And it would actually lead to different outputs. In a real life situation, you would not come up with the same recommendation, right?
Well, it actually does come up with different solutions in very precise academic problems, and Professor Rafa showed that in his publication, how the different algorithms would come up with a different solution. But at the end, he said, in real world problems, for all practical purposes, these algorithms actually take you to approximately the same place.
Well, okay.
So we don't really have to worry about getting to the wrong place. We're getting to the same place either way.
Okay.
But it turns out that the algorithm that I came up with was more practical, at least it wasn't in that day, with the type of optimization methodology that was available, which was linear programming. His algorithm.
What is that?
What is linear programming?
No, what year was that? Was it that you did this?
1991 is when I published.
Okay.
Yeah. And John Nash actually came up with his solutions in the early 50s. If the preferences of the parties are all adequately represented, then this is what is known by the neutral site. There is no individual party knows what this looks like, but the smart settle neutral site knows how this looks, and because it understands how everybody becomes satisfied, it can guide the parties from that status quo to the efficiency frontier. And the smart settle process invites parties to consider like going in a process that will get them into this zone of possible agreement. And they start with, well, actually, it encourages the parties to set targets as well. So once you've set a target, then there's a smaller zone of likely agreement. All right, so we have all of this set up in their private preferences, and then the parties begin to exchange proposals. And we encourage actually optimistic proposals at the beginning, so they don't get stuck at a place where they refuse to concede. So in this particular case, you can see that these optimistic proposals are outside of the zone of possible agreement. Neither party would accept the other party's optimistic. However, smart settle, understanding how these parties become satisfied, is able to generate suggestions. So here are some suggestions that are generated by smart settle, and some of them fall in that zone of possible agreement, and some of them are falling in that zone of likely agreement. And those ones at the top right are the ones that are most likely to become an agreement. And let's suppose both parties or all parties, the World Bank is here too, we're just not showing them right now, and have agreed to those particular packages. And then there's another algorithm called reward early effort. So it encourages parties to move quickly into the zone of possible agreement. And then it rewards the party that moves most quickly to the place where they're expecting that agreement to lie. And so if both parties had accepted these two packages that are in the circle, smart settle would choose one of them to become the baseline. And it uses that algorithm to reward early effort to decide which one becomes the baseline. Now, going back to that story and to our preferences, parties all have different preferences, and there are ways of making trade-offs to get to a better solution if you're not on the efficiency frontier already. And in our initial story with the two children quarreling over the orange, if they had actually divided the orange in half and they each had half an orange, you could imagine that was the baseline. They both had 50-50. And then the mediator came along and said, okay, let's divide this a little differently, right? The peels to one, the fruit to the other. And that's actually what happens when you go from the baseline up to the efficiency frontier. Which is take advantage of trade-offs. So what questions do you have about what I've shown you here so far?
Well, if we could, I don't know whether this is the best way to proceed, but I'm thinking of going back to your first table showing the preferences for different issues on different issues. So how would it look if you were going to trade, if you were making a deal about, let's say, eliminating nuclear weapons versus the glacier jurisdiction? something like that. Is there some way of what you're doing is trading off one for the other?
Yeah, that's right. It is just the same way as
How would
the.
it look? How would you diagram that on this chart of efficiency limits? Is there a way of showing how that would look?
Well, so we're looking at this from Pakistan's point of view, and Pakistan puts an importance of 29 on the nuclear weapons issue. That's the difference between 6 years and 20 years. That's what 29 is. And the glacier there, it's worth 10 points. That's the difference between Pakistan getting the glacier and just staying with the status quo.
Okay. Now hold on. So in these numbers in parentheses represent, one is the preference of India and the other is the preference of Pakistan?
Not necessarily.
No. Well, when you say it's the difference between those two numbers, what does that difference mean? Is it, why did you come up with minimum southeastern flow? Where does this 1 represent and what does the 3 represent? Is this, how did you?
Okay, so on that issue, the minimum southeastern flow, if we go back to this map here, doesn't show the rivers, but there are rivers that flow from the highest point, you know where that glacier is. Mm-hmm. The rivers flow from there down into Pakistan, which is all that yellow part at the left. It's all flat. And it's flowing down from the mountains up there by the glacier down to Pakistan. And some of these rivers flow through the India-controlled part of it, and others flow through the Pakistan-controlled part of it. And there was the Indus Water Treaty that was, let's see, when was that? 1960, about. I'm not sure exactly when that was. It's in the video. But the World Bank actually helped them negotiate the Indus Waters Treaty that gave each of these countries certain rights over the water. And in that particular issue that we're talking about here, the minimum southeastern flow, I think it's around the treaty gave actually it doesn't specify that anything. I'm not sure it specifies a number for the minimum southeastern flow, but let's suppose we go to the next one there, which is minimum Kishinganga flow. Well, there's a particular dam that India built. If we go back here, and you see it in the middle where it says line of control, it's pointing there. Well, on the India side, they made a dam and they diverted the water so that it went in a different direction, and it reduced the water that was going to the Pakistan side. And of course, the people that lived there on the other side of that red line didn't like that at all because they depended on certain water there. And so that was taken to the high courts, and eventually they did decide that India should provide at least 9 cubic meters per second. And you can see that we've reintroduced that issue here, and we've said, well, maybe 9 isn't the optimal. Let's negotiate somewhere between 6 and 12 cubic meters per second.
So you made up those numbers. It didn't result from any empirical or factual limits that they designated, that the parties designated.
Well, we didn't ask the real countries because we only had a dozen people, like most of them Rotarians, that we were working with, and but between us, we imagine some ranges that the
Okay.
parties would negotiate over.
Oh, so in a real negotiation, they would specify what limits they might consider.
In a real negotiation, we would identify the issues without the numbers, first of all, and then we would ask the parties, well, in an ideal world, what would you like to have on this issue? What would you like to have on that issue? And you ask each of the parties, you know, what's your best outcome? And from those discussions, now it's really important that those early discussions, we don't try to solve the issues. We're only developing, like identifying what the issues are and what the ranges are. And we're developing this a single negotiating framework. It's like the final agreement, except it has blanks for all the unresolved issues. In this case, we ended up here with almost a dozen unresolved issues, and these are the ones that actually got fed into the Smart Settle Infinity interface.
Okay, good. Now let's move on and tell me how it works.
All right. So we're going through this here, and the parties each identify status quo, so they know they have to get better than the status quo, and they understand they can't get better than the efficiency frontier, but they'd like to end up there in that zone of possible agreement, and actually preferably above targets that they also set. And that's the zone of likely agreement. And Smart Settle encourages them to exchange these optimistic proposals, and which in this case are unacceptable to either party. But Smart Settle, knowing the preferences of parties, can generate packages that look better to the parties, and some of them look, quite good, like those two at the top right. And you can imagine if both parties accept those secretly, that's what the process does. If you watch the video, you'll see how that works. Then one of them becomes the baseline, and then it applies this final algorithm, maximize the minimum gain, to make sure there's no value left on the table. So now I've shown this to you from like two parties, like it's two-party point of view, but actually there's a third party called the World Bank that was in this negotiation as well. And if you extend this to 3 dimensions, it looks something like this. Now, the efficiency frontier is no longer just a line, but it's actually a surface. And you've got a third dimension there. You can see another axis labeled World Bank. And now it's, instead of a 2-dimensional problem, it's a 3-dimensional problem. And it's a whole lot more complex. But
now the idea is that both of these, they get what would please them, but unless the World Bank also is thrilled by their solution, it's no value, because they really care most about getting the World Bank approval.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, they got to find a solution that all 3 parties will accept. That's
I have trouble mathematically, but go ahead.
And so, they need to end up on that efficiency frontier, which is that multicolored surface. And any point on that multicolored surface is efficient, but we don't show all the details here, like the status quo, and but only a part of that surface would be a place where they could end up and everybody becomes satisfied. All right, so I guess I could show this to you from a little different point of view as well. You can imagine that Smart Settle has a virtual negotiating table, and on that table there are proposals, those proposals that were on that previous graph, and the Smart Settle suggestions. And also we have a third type of package called a masquerade, in which a party makes an anonymous proposal. And that those anonymous proposals actually serve to increase the trust that parties have in the process, because they look at those packages objectively, because they don't know whether the other party has created them or whether Smart Settle has generated them. And all of these packages have ratings. So you can see those little white areas there that are labeled ratings, but those ratings are only known to the party that's looking at their own screen. So every package is a rating, but those ratings are different for every party, and that's how they know, is this package better than another one? According to their preference representation, they accept those packages with the best ratings. And again, this will be a lot easier to understand if you go back and look at the video.
Okay.
Well, I can show you this one as well. There are actually three packages here. The status quo is something that we asked each party to identify, first of all, like, where are you now on every one of these issues? And so let's plot the status quo, and we're going to just call that arbitrarily 0. And now this is still Pakistan's point of view. And when we came to a baseline, their baseline was worth 322 points in this simulation. And with each point being worth $10 million, that's like, if you look at the baseline and the improvement, each that are over 300 points, well, that's $3 billion compared to the status quo. And so I guess I could give you a quick peek at those 8 algorithms. These are all 8 algorithms that are implemented at the neutral site. And we could be here a long time talking about all of these algorithms. But I have to just refer you to go back to these videos that were created to document this workshop. And it says they're on the e-negotiation channel, but they're not there yet. I will give the links to the drafts to Meta, and you'll be able to watch them ahead of time.
Okay.
So that's basically what I prepared here. Meta, if you have further questions, we could.
Well, still, my initial idea is still in my mind. The World Bank's point of view is all that at least Pakistan cares about. You didn't show me what India thought, but I presume that India also felt that really getting that money out of the World Bank is really what matters. If that is the case for both of them, so that, for example, the 350 points is allotted to the importance of the World Bank's satisfaction, as opposed to something like 9 out of their satisfaction on this or that issue, then I still think, why wouldn't they just say, okay, World Bank, you tell us what would make you happy and we'll agree to it?
If you just had one party negotiating with the World Bank, maybe that would work, but there are 2 parties there, and they have to solve
But what if India, I mean, you didn't show me what it was from India's point of view.
But I'll send you the video link, and when you look at that, you'll see what it is from India's point of view.
Was it also disproportionately heavy weighting of the importance of the World Bank's acceptance? Because if it was anything like Pakistan's preference system, then both of them would have every incentive to just say, okay, World Bank, you decide.
Yeah. Well, it definitely is an incentive. The money that's provided by the World Bank does provide an incentive, and and this negotiation was not that difficult. I wish it was that easy in real life. And you're saying, Meta, why can't we just walk over there and offer them the solution and see if they'll agree? But
yeah,
it you know.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the next question. I was thinking at it from their point of view. Why wouldn't they just say the World Bank should make the decision? Forget about Smart Settle. I don't even care who you are. Go away, because we can just turn it over to the World Bank. On the other hand, if they don't do that, there's also the thing of people saying, okay, we're going to negotiate with the Smart Settle. And we know that you've already figured out what the optimum answer is, because you've done mathematics that we haven't done. We've provided you our set of preferences, and you've made your calculation about what would be the optimum solution. So you just tell us the optimum solution and we'll accept it. Why not do it that way? Either way would be fine. Maybe that would be better than turning it over to the World Bank, because you know that you're even taking account of the World Bank's preferences. You've got that that plane that pretty diagram with the colors on it. So that you've already calculated that. So what do you bother negotiating for? Why don't you just tell them what's in their best interest and tell them take it or leave it?
Yeah. Well, maybe you could do that. Or some skilled mediators would be able to do that. In fact, the skilled mediators do use these same techniques, but it's a lot harder without the actual Smart Settle Infinity interface to actually guide them in the process.
So you have a computer app that does these calculations. Once they put in their preferences and weight them by how much they care about each one, then your computer makes the calculation of what's the best solution, right? Yeah. And you could sell that app to anybody who's got a problem. If I've got some sort of dispute, I'm going on, my finances or something like that, I could get a hold of your app, and it's going to tell me what I should aim for, because that's going to be the best answer in the long run.
Well, that's true. Smart Settle. We have two products: Smart Settle 1 for very simple problems, Smart Settle Infinity for the most complex problems, and we're working on another version that will actually join the two products that we have right now, so that we have a continuous offering between simple and complex. But indeed, we do have software products that you can take advantage of if you let us know what your problem is, and we may have to train you to use the software to solve your problem.
Okay, what if you were to plug in the preferences of Russia and Ukraine right now? You don't have very many issues for them to solve. One is whether to accept the Minsk agreements. One is whether or not Ukraine should become a neutral state. One is for what NATO will do under various circumstances. Let's see, what else? One is what's going to happen to the Donbass. And one is the preferences, I guess, I know you got some different actors in there, like who are these people fighting in the Donbass, and do they count really, or are they just window dressing? So it'd be an interesting exercise to plug a global threat like today's war into this conflict and see what your algorithm is going to come up with. Have you tried doing that?
Well, we've thought about it, but we haven't done that. It takes a fair amount of effort to, develop the model each time we come up with one. So, and perfectly willing to try. We need some funding to do it. And
yeah. Okay. Well, I think it'd be a neat thing to do because it really prove whether or not then it would prove really what my initial theory is correct or not. But if you come up with the optimum answer, how likely is it that people will say, okay, that's good, we'll buy that. That's really what we really wanted anyway, or that's the best we can do. But I think it's more likely that they're going to say, Putin is going to say, no, back in the, Peter the Great did this or Catherine the Great did this in Crimea, and we have been mad at her ever since, or pleased with her ever since, or, something like has nothing to do with any of the current dynamics of the thing, but just based on, you speak Ukrainian and we want you to speak Russian, or some stupid, irrelevant factor having to do with ancient history, or, some cultural blockage that, I'm so mad that I won't agree to anything these guys say because I hate them. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
I'd rather cut off my nose to spite my face.
So
accept what is the rational solution.
Yeah, exactly what you're saying is why we can't just come up with the answer and hand it to them on a silver platter. We have everybody has to be involved in the whole process, and be, first of all, understand the process, and they have to trust the process. There's one major hurdle we have to get past, and that is to decide where the neutral site is going to be. And probably Russia would not agree to use a system where the neutral site is in Canada. They don't like Canada too much right now. But we could move that neutral site to a place like China or Israel. It's some place that Russia would agree is neutral enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fascinating. Well, I think it's the way to go. And the only problem is you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah.
If we weren't also irrational and stupid and emotional and, have all these identities that we care about, it would be easier, wouldn't it? I mean, I don't know how much it happens that if you present people with a rational answer, they will say, oh, good, thank you very much, we'll do that. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah. No, they have to be involved in the process. Just delivering the answer doesn't work, just for the exact reasons that you explained so well.
Well, I didn't explain it, but I think I sort of got it, what you're talking about. And good for you. Now, if the rest of us would just cooperate a little bit better, we'd have an answer to all our world problems. So thank you very much.
Well, I'd be happy to be here, and I hope that some of what I said was understandable. And
I got it. I thought, sort of got it. Okay. Thank you. This has been fun. Enjoyed it.
All right. Well, I enjoyed it too.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks for inviting me.
Bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode 424. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get there, look around because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or the episode number in the search bar or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, Scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. I'll see you there.